Welcome in, everyone. Thanks for joining me again. I'd like to discuss the relationship between compassion and acceptance. As this word acceptance comes up a lot when I'm describing some of the compassion practices I tend to teach and mentor people on. And so I've been thinking about it lately because for me, acceptance is a pretty large part of my daily process of working with my life, working with my thoughts, emotions, relationships. And yet there's this other element to it that does go a little deeper than the typical way we might work with acceptance, depending on you. So first I'd like to let's start with that. Let's start with kind of what I see as maybe a more typical way, which I don't think is exclusive to working with acceptance. I think it's just exclusive to, or I should say it encompasses a lot of the ways we work with our life, which is through the conceptual mind. Because this is, for a lot of us in the modern world, this is how we're taught to interact with the world for the most part. This is how we're taught to interpret it. It's probably the number one tool we go to, our processing, judgmental, I don't mean that in a negative way, but just sort of our logical, judgmental mind. And of course, some of us use that more than others. And again, I don't want to generalize, but I do see this as predominant in the modern world just because of the ways modern education works, where we're taught to use the thinking mind. And there's really, of course, there's good and bad things with this, just as anything. But I want to describe a little bit of the downside of this in relation to compassion and acceptance. And so because we work primarily through the conceptual mind, a lot of us, at least the people I come into contact with, and of course, myself included, I'm trying to open up my own habit with that. So because we often are working with the world, working with our life experience, emotions, thoughts, etc., through that lens, of course, acceptance is going to come through that lens. So we might have, a phrase or a word that pops into mind. Can I accept this? Or I should accept this? Or how do I accept this? And then we might wrestle with it. You know what I mean? Wrestle with the situation or predicament we're in that we can't accept. Because obviously we're prompting ourselves to accept something because we're having difficulty with it. This kind of opens up a little sidebar where, I think there can be a question like, should we accept something? And that's a different topic. That's a little bit of a different conversation in the sense that, there's certain things I don't think we need to accept. Although what I'm sort of emphasizing or centering around here is not like those things where we have to discern whether we need to accept it or not. It's more in relation to what life is in front of us right now, meaning what's happening this very moment, what kinds of thoughts, processes of thinking, emotions, experiences around us. Car alarm just went off outside. Part of me does not want to accept that. I'm trying to record this right now. But if I don't accept that, because it's not something I can change, right? Right this moment. So if I don't work that into my practice of compassion and acceptance, I'm going to suffer. I'm just going to be more resentful, right? Because it's happening. And so things like that, right? So I think in this area, this is really the area I want to focus on the most, not where we have to genuinely reflect on something and kind of discern whether we should accept something into our life or work with it. It's more like it's coming up. And so we need to work with it. And particularly here, I'm talking about, our emotions and beliefs, right? And our beliefs related to our processes of thinking and thought. So, really I'm talking about our internal landscape. And of course, we can apply compassion to anything, and most importantly, our relationships with others. But I find it doesn't go that deep unless we've done this preliminary work on an ongoing basis with providing compassion towards our emotions, providing compassion towards our experience. And I just as an example, I just use is sort of like, I can feel lots of things pop up in me when there's a sound, for instance, happening that I don't want. And so, there's a tightening a little bit, which is related to fear. It's interrupting my recording, things like that. And maybe you didn't even hear it, so I have no idea, but just use it again as an example because it popped up. So there's a tightening and there's a resistance, there's a rejection. And then, of course, from fear, for some of us, aggression can come. I don't like that, or I hate that, or, we start to get angry, etc. So all of these are internal experiences. And for me, when I'm working with acceptance in a non-conceptual way, let's say a less conceptual way, it's more with these internal shifts, which we need to get to know in meditation, specifically through, I recommend more somatic meditations, things like the handshake practice from my teacher, Sonam Rinpoche. I have other content on that. Also, you can Google it from him. Just do a search online. I also have guided meditations on that as well. So you can check those out in other videos on my website. But basically, any kind of somatic, which means an embodied practice, to actually connect and work with a feeling, right? So we're not always stuck with, as I said, this strong habit of trying to overthink it, figure it out, kind of, churn on it with a thinking mind to come to a conclusion of what should I do? Should I accept it or not? There's just the fact, this is arising in me, for instance, some constriction or tension. This is arising. I need to accept that it's arising. I don't need to accept the sound necessarily, though we could argue that would be useful. It's more I need to accept my reaction first. I need to accept it's happening and then provide a compassionate presence with that, which for me has a lot to do with, first of all, not adding more tension on top, not continuing in the thought rumination, if I can, around what I like or dislike, and just be with the feeling and open to it. So for me, there's a strong component of what some might call acceptance there. I sometimes don't use that word because it can get misconstrued in this conceptual way. But I think it does apply because it's an acceptance of my experience right now, that it's, number one, happening. That number two, I'm experiencing some level of dissatisfaction or discomfort from it. And number three, that I don't need to experience discomfort from it. There's another way. So I think this third aspect is really important, a really important part of compassion and acceptance, where there's another way to work with what's arising. That I don't need to necessarily get rid of that tension or discomfort to open up space. So this is kind of little more another little sidebar, but I think it's very related, which is like, why would we want to accept something? I think this is a whole nother area to explore in your contemplation and meditation. So for me here, I just named it, but a lot of the reason I am very passionate about accepting the moment as it is and meeting it with embodied compassion or compassionate presence and feeling the feeling, basically being with that experience as best I can without pushing it away or becoming it. The reason I want to do that is because I've seen over many years, this opens up space. And, I don't know how to describe that space necessarily because it's a feeling. I guess we could say within that space, there's more ease, there's more contentment, there's more okayness. There's definitely not the tension and constriction of resistance in the body. And there's just more fluidity. So for me, I'm really passionate about challenging myself throughout the day. Can I include this in my awareness? Can I include this in my practice of acceptance and compassion? Whatever's arising. And there's some things I can include, right? I mean, we're all expanding our scope of what we can include. But definitely there's things I can include now that I could have never included 10 years ago. So we grow, we expand. And I think it's a useful incentive to taste this kind of space I'm talking about, contentment on a feeling level, a little bit of okayness that, we don't have to necessarily feel good all the time to experience spaciousness, to experience contentment. This is a big deal, and I think this is where it starts to really lead into more of a liberative practice connected to the Buddhist traditions, which is a process. It's not like we're unliberated and then liberated. For most of us, there's a long process of little tastes of what it might be like to be more free, but we're still getting caught. And then we expand, we grow over the years. But either way, this is I think really unique to the Buddhist tradition, or I should say any tradition that really is interested in genuine liberation, not just meditating to feel better. Because when we're just meditating to feel better, yes, acceptance helps there, but I don't know. It might not necessarily help us to accept and be with discomfort as an ongoing thing. Because sometimes we can accept discomfort, but that doesn't mean it goes away. So are we okay with that? That's the whole question here. And that's where I think eventually acceptance, it can't just end with acceptance. It has to shift into compassion. Compassion is a very wide field, so I'm just going to touch on it here. It's a very wide field in Buddhism because it starts to touch into non-duality, the teachings on shunyata or emptiness in Buddhism, because these elements of the space of compassion start to meet the space of what reality is. That reality is not fixed, permanent, and independent. And in order for those two things to come together, usually the Buddhist tradition kind of separates the path into practices and study and contemplation on the wisdom of non-duality or shunyata, and then the skillful means of meditation practices of compassion, loving kindness, bodhicitta, etc. But eventually, these two wings actually come together as a singular experience. For very realized practitioners, we call bodhisattvas. And then, of course, for enlightened beings, we call Buddhas or awakened ones. So either way, we need to eventually find a way to unify these two in our practice and start working with more the absolute side of things, or that things are not singular, permanent, and independent, and starting to free that up and experience that as internal spaciousness and fluidity with our life. But compassion also helps with that, even just conceptual compassion, or working with compassion as an expression of our life, as a way we want to work with our emotions, thoughts, and others. So compassion can sort of widen out into what I said a moment ago of these two wings we call in Mahayana Buddhism. But also compassion can be expressed as a willingness to be with discomfort and to explore it, and to not add on the extra resistance or extra discomfort of trying to reject it. So I feel like a lot of relative compassion practices in Buddhism really work with this. We're kind of challenging that habit that immediately wants to conquer, get rid of, defeat any kind of dissatisfaction, stress, or discomfort that arises. So hence why I'm, recommending a practice of acceptance that then eventually moves into the space of compassion, which again is very difficult to describe as an experience. We usually define compassion as the aspiration or wish for ourselves and others to be free from dissatisfaction and suffering and the causes of dissatisfaction and suffering. So we usually define it kind of that way, a little bit with kind of in a little bit more of a complete way with words. But actually those words really, I find, do not describe the experience very well. Because again, the experience is a deep intimacy with not only our own experience of dissatisfaction, stress, and pain, but that of others. Not that we can feel others, but it's an expression of a willingness to be with the dissatisfaction of others, and then an upliftedness, wanting to see them free of that. Right? And of course, this includes ourselves as well. So in my experience, we can only embody that through actually challenging ourselves to accept and then open to, in a very intimate and close way, our own discomfort, our own dissatisfaction. And again, if this is new to you, you don't necessarily take on the hardest, most intense discomfort you experience in your life. You take on small little things. Like for me, the car alarm is not that big a deal at the end of the day. I highly doubt you heard it or even care it happened in the audio. But it's like it's there and it's big enough to work with, but small enough to work with. You know what I mean? It's not like the most overwhelming thing I'll probably experience today. So try that. And the first is sort of this question of, can I accept? The second is leaning in or becoming intimate with the feeling around that, right? Again, like I said, there's practices to do this that you can work with. But at the same time, sometimes even these really small prompts can help. Can I be with this feeling? And then we drop the thinking analytical process and just sit with the feeling, right? But we're not trying to dwell in the feeling. We're actually using this quality of awareness we develop in meditation to host the feeling. So that's another topic. But either way, if you're new to this, just try some simple steps with a slightly uncomfortable situation or feeling. And then, of course, you're welcome to dive into more guided meditations, like I said previously. But for those of you who are kind of used to this, I also want to invite you into, the takeaway practice of doing this as many times throughout the day as you can. For me, they're in very short and small moments where there's just a sense of, I notice a subtle dissatisfaction or a not so subtle one, and I lean into it. I try to become intimate with it. There's a sense of, can I accept that this is happening is the first thing. I accept it's happening. And then the second is, can I be with it, right? And then, of course, our practice of embodiment, our practice of embodied awareness is going to serve that. And we're going to be able to grow our capacity to be with life in different kinds of expressions, especially these ones I'm talking about. So I think I'll leave it there. I really appreciate you listening or listening to or watching this. And of course, if you want to grow a practice of embodied compassion, please reach out. I can recommend resources. There's also a ton of resources on my YouTube channel, my podcast, and also my website. So you can go to that at scotttusa.com. So thanks so much, everyone. Wishing you all the best in your practice of acceptance and compassion. Take care.